Welcome to the Art of Badassery, where I explore what it takes to live life on your own terms, break free from the status quo, and unleash your inner badass. Whether you're a rebel at heart or simply seeking inspiration to step outside your comfort zone, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Mahara Wayman, and each week I dive into the stories, insights, and strategies of those who have mastered the art of badassery and are living life to the fullest. They smile when no one is looking. Welcome to the Art of Badassery. My name is Mahara, and today I'm really excited to introduce you to my guest, Katie K. May, a DBT therapist and founder of Creative Healing Teen Support Centers. Katie has helped thousands of teens navigate the challenges of depression, anxiety, and self-harm. But Katie's journey began with her own struggles as a teen, where she turned to self-harm and risky behaviors to cope with intense emotions. An unexpected pregnancy in her 20s became the catalyst for change, leading her to break the cycle of pain and find her life's purpose. Now, Katie's on a mission to help teens know they aren't alone in their feelings and to guide parents in creating environments where their kids feel truly understood and accepted. Join us today as Katie shares her inspiring story and her dedication to making a difference in the lives of teens and their families. She is a certified badass. I'm so excited to have her on the show. Katie, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, outside of the obvious, amazing head of purple hair, which in my world is totally signifies being badass, all joking aside, can you take us back to the early days? And I have to ask, did you feel badass when you were a struggling teen?
I did not. I will say I probably didn't have a lot of nice thoughts about myself in general, which, if I'm thinking about my upbringing and the messaging that I received, it makes a whole lot of sense that I was given a lot of messages that I was not good enough, I was inadequate, I was too much, I was not enough, like all of the things. And they are things that I believed about myself for a very long time.
Okay. I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that, whether on purpose or inadvertently, subconsciously, with malice or without. So many of us grow up hearing these messages from loved ones or from peers or from society in general. Can you share with us just a little bit about where you found yourself, the space that you found yourself in when you were just about to realize enough was enough?
Yeah, I think there were several points in my journey where that was happening. So, as a teenager, I coped with a situation that I was put in, as many of us do. And I think that for a long time, I lacked the insight or really the perspective to figure out how to move beyond that, or maybe I just didn't have the means. The moment when things really changed for me is when I found out that I was pregnant, and I realized that life is bigger than the pain inside me, that I had to, for the sake of my child, make changes to my life situation and also my own emotional health and well-being so that I could break cycles of things that had happened to me, that had happened prior to me, and really create a healthier life for my family.
Okay. First of all, kudos. That's a big decision
Thanks.
to make. What was the first thing you did?
The first thing I would say is similar to what we say in a lot of these like wellness programs is recognizing that things are not working the way that they are, right? Like my patterns of automatic reacting, my tendency to want to make feelings go away with substances or other unhealthy behaviors. Like they're all things that I decided I had to make that intentional decision. Like we're not doing these things anymore. And that wasn't easy. It was work. So I would say it's recognizing that things were not working and then making a commitment to working on myself, not putting that blame on anyone else, but recognizing it is up to me to make these changes. And now I have to put this into practice.
I've heard that before fairly regularly, actually, this understanding that, the buck stops here and
Yeah.
it stops here and it starts here as well. But practically, let's get really honest about, you're a young woman and you're
Yeah.
like, this ain't working. I've got to take control of my life.
Mhm.
What does that look like?
Like the tactical steps that I took. I'm gonna bring
Yeah.
you back. Okay, so I recognize that, or I find out that I'm pregnant. I lose my shit a little bit because I'm unemployed. I history of addiction, living at home with my family, 26, all these things that are like life is not working at all. So I want to be really honest that before there was like, oh yeah, let's make life changes. There was a lot of freak out, a lot of panic, shame, fear, all of the things that we would expect to happen if, someone was in a situation like mine. But beyond that, with the decision that I made to make these changes, it was one, putting myself in therapy, two, recognizing that I was the one who had to make changes. It was making a decision about how I was going to take care of myself, putting myself back at the gym, watching what I was eating, like all of the different things that you might think about or give recommendations to others for how do you take care of yourself were the things that I was doing. And it wasn't just one. At that point, I would say I was like throwing spaghetti at the wall, doing all of them. I was, anything that I could to improve myself, I was. I would also say I'm an avid reader and learner. So I was reading books. I was taking advice from, other people. I was doing everything because at that point I didn't have a clear path. I just knew it had to be better than it was.
Okay. So brave. And, from my point of view, probably everybody listening, that takes a shitload of courage. So I just want to call out that it takes a lot of courage to make a change when you have grown up or you've had a long time of living a certain way. So first of all, yay for you. Glad you made the call. What are some of the things? I don't even want some. I want one. What's the biggest
Yeah.
thing you learned about yourself once you made that choice to take action for you?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is not the biggest thing, but I'm going to just say that so we could get to where that goes. But like that, I can handle more than I gave myself credit for. But I believe that to be true of my entire life. The situation that I was in throughout my life was one where I learned I can handle more than I thought that I could, and I can keep going, and I'm persistent. And so, what I think the biggest thing that I learned is that I am not too much. I am not enough. I am, in fact, exactly who I need to be to get myself to where I want to go. So I think that was like a defining moment of me figuring out that I don't need the approval of anyone else. I don't need the validation from people that are never going to validate me. But what I can do is give that to myself and feel whole in myself so that I can be someone to give that to my child and to the world. And the things that I'm doing now, like you need that level of self-love and confidence to be able to do the things that I do.
Was the idea of self-love very foreign to you, or was it something that had been on the periphery of your existence and of your understanding?
It's almost like It's almost like asking the question, like, was the idea of swimming well something that you were aware of? Like, I didn't have the luxury of self-love because I was in self-survival for so long. And so, no, it wasn't something that I was actively thinking about. It was more of like the more I learned about myself, the more I learned about my capabilities. And going back to school was a big part of that as well, like making a decision to become a therapist, going back to school, having a new environment reflect back to me, like, oh, you are good and smart and talented and like all these things that I never heard growing up. So like all of those things were things that led to me liking myself more and feeling more confident in myself. But it wasn't like I was, lying awake at night thinking about how do I achieve self-love. I was
It was so foreign.
right, exactly.
I like the fact that you've highlighted that it was so foreign because it's not even part of your repertoire back then, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
Self-care would be a luxury back then because I don't have time for self-care. I'm just in survival mode.
exactly.
Would you say now, though, that you're on the other side of that with all of
Mhm.
the work that you've done? Do you still consider self-care a luxury or is it just a given, a necessity?
I want to shift my thinking of it from self-care or self-love to really being self-compassion. Like, I think that self-love or even confidence are things that are so variable. I feel really confident in the work that I do, but if you put me in a room of neurosurgeons, I couldn't keep up in that conversation. I wouldn't feel super confident. So I think that's very contextual, but I have a lot of self-compassion to know that if I mess up, that it's okay, that I don't have to be perfect. Like all of these things that allow me to show up imperfectly and embarrass myself constantly and still like myself, it's because I have compassion for myself.
Compassionate self-forgiveness is a key component, I think, to being a badass. I
Yeah.
chat with my clients all the time. I'm curious though, as you're still quite young when you were starting this journey, can you share any tips for how you put one foot in front of the other day after day? Because to go from such a place of survival to
Mhm.
I'm going to get through this, I'm going to get there. I imagine that there were some ups and downs, like, right?
Totally. Yeah, and there still are ups and downs. I think there's like a couple parts in the process. One is just an innate quality that I have is that like not doing what I set out to do is not an option. I'm just like locked in, and no matter what, even if there's many, many bumps in the road, that's gonna happen. So I think that's just something that works for me. But when we say like putting one foot in front of the other, taking it day by day, there are a couple things that come to mind. One is that noticing what progress looks like. And this is something that I talk a lot about in my work is that for so many people, they're so focused on the gap, like what they don't have and where they're not, and that they're not at their ultimate end goal yet. And for me, progress looked some days like, well, I'm not under a bridge doing drugs, so I'm doing great today. Like, so really looking at how far I came rather than this journey of where I haven't been yet had helped me to maintain momentum and give myself credit along the way.
Really a good call out because we do need to take a reality check, no matter where you are in your life, right? Part of being a
Yeah.
badass is being realistic. Like, hey, I'm having a tough day today. Hey,
Mhm.
I actually don't think I can get out of bed, and that's okay
Totally.
because there are days like that for sure. So, when did you realize that you wanted to become a therapist?
You know what? There was a time back when I started my bachelor's degree that I was like, I want to be a therapist. And then I took some class that I didn't like. It was very sciencey or mathy. And I was like, nope, too hard, not doing this. And I changed gears and I got an English degree. And then when I, again, like this catalyst for change, when I found out I was pregnant, I spent that whole time really reflecting on what is my purpose in life. I had had a job at a construction company and I got laid off. It was like a blessing in disguise or whatever you want to call it. So I just had all this time to sit with myself and figure out who I was. And I've always been someone who makes meaning of my experiences. And I thought if I got through all these things, I have a lot to give back to somebody else. And there has to be a reason why I went through this and persevered and came out the other side. And so that was when I decided to go back to school to get a counseling degree because it just felt like there, this is my purpose. This is my reason. And I was right. Here I am.
And here you are, and we're so glad that you're here. I'm curious though, did your ability to question and get curious about yourself, did
Yeah.
it come out of the experience of surviving, or was that a trait that you've always had?
I think it's a trait that I've always had. I remember as far back as being like 5 or 6 years old, and I would lie on the floor on the side of my bed and I would like write sad poetry. And I've just always been very introspective and had depth in my thinking and really like to reflect a lot. I think it's a quality that I'm pretty proud of in myself is that I do question myself, the world, and I always want to be better. And so that was something that helped me actually cope through a lot of difficult situations, but it's always been a part of who I am.
Sounds like a plan. Good for you. It For some of my clients and even in my own experience, I've had to really work at being
Mhm.
curious because I found, I don't know if anybody listening can relate, but man, there have been times in my life where I've just felt so overwhelmed. I felt
Mhm.
I didn't have the energy to get curious. And it was like, you know what? I just got to get through the day. I don't give a shit why. I just need to do it. Or I don't know. I don't care necessarily questioning why I'm feeling this way. I just don't have the energy to question. I just need to get through the day. So you're lucky in a way that you've had that all along because I know some of us have to really work at that level of curiosity, almost give ourselves permission to get curious.
Right. And I think it waxes and wanes, right? There's times when I just need to get through the day as well, but giving yourself space or giving myself space felt really important to be able to heal and move forward.
Okay, so you went back to school
Yeah.
and tell us a little bit about that and how what you learned about yourself in that experience.
So that was wild, actually. You go to school, you think you're going to learn to be a therapist to other people, and you learn so much about yourself. I think some of the most enlightening classes were around family systems and being able to recognize and find words for or, patterns for the family dysfunction that I grew up in, and recognizing that some of the things that I took as typical or like, oh, everyone goes through this, that is not the case. So I learned a lot about healthy development, about healthy interaction patterns. And I learned a lot more about how to take that scope and turn it inward and look at myself and begin healing more. I wrote a dissertation on shame-based parenting because that was kind of my experience growing up. And my professor was like, "Oh my God, so insightful. Like, this is great information." I'm like, "Yes, I'm my best case study." Like, so it was a really helpful experience in healing myself. And I think you'll hear a lot of therapists say the same, that in becoming a therapist, it was because of what they went through, but the experience allowed them to heal a lot in that process.
Okay. So did you know right from the get-go that you wanted to support teens and parents?
No, I thought that was going to be too difficult for me. I thought that it would hit on a time in my life that would be too painful. And so originally, well, so there's kind of like three phases of this. Originally, I wanted to work in substance abuse and addiction because that was something that I had been through. And so I did an internship at a substance abuse center, and I felt really heavy and sad every day when I left because what I learned is that they spend a whole lot of time focused on the one thing they can't do that they want to do in their lives. And that just didn't align for me. And maybe that's not the same everywhere, but it was where I interned. It didn't align for me because I wanted to focus more on a life worth living and a life worth having, and not just like white knuckling through something that you weren't allowed to do anymore or couldn't do anymore. And so I decided that was not for me. And then I did some work at a domestic violence center, and I really enjoyed that. And that aligns with some of my, growing up experiences as well. And so I was like, okay, maybe this is for me. But that was an internship. And so I fell into a position working at a hospital program for children and teens. And I just was naturally good at connecting with teens. I think I have some arrested development in my teenage years, perhaps, but I vibed and it worked. And so that was the direction that I took in my career.
So, so good. And curious, your family watching you go through your challenges and then jumping into school and learning and studying to be a therapist. Can I ask what their reaction was?
So it varies. I mean, this is part of a bigger story, but I'm estranged from a lot of my family and not by my own choice. And that's a story I can get into if it's interesting. But for a long time, it was like, but why aren't you a doctor? And then I think maybe like 6 years into owning my group practice, having multiple locations, owning buildings, like um, all of the like accolades that have come with that. It was like a birthday card where my dad told me he was proud of me, and I cried for probably an hour after that. So it was like a long road. And I think that also speaks to like how hard I worked to try and be good enough and never got that feedback that I was until I was at a level of success that was kind of hitting people over the head. And then finally, I am good enough to be proud of.
I'm getting kind of emotional listening to your story because, I have kids and
Yeah.
when I remember, all I ever wanted was to have kids. I just wanted to be a mama.
Hmm.
And as a parent, I think, we all do our best. Sometimes our best really sucks, right? It shouldn't even be on the list of being this is not even, couldn't possibly be thought of as being good. But from my own point of view, I've always done my best, and I've always wished and hoped and prayed that my children would grow up recognizing their worth. And despite all of our best efforts, you know, shit happens, and our children have their own journey and their own story to tell. And it's not always congruent with what I've wanted or what I've said. And that's been hard. And
Yeah.
I know that there's been some guilt around that. Like, what did I not tell you enough? Like, how come you don't feel enough? Like, I think you're enough. How come not to put words in my kid's mouth, but I think as a parent, you can sometimes look back and go, oh my God, what was I thinking? Oh no. I remember the first time that my mom came to me, and she was so upset, and she apologized for a spanking that she had given me when my very first spanking. I remember it. I stuck my tongue out at her. I was like 2, 3 maybe, and we were holding hands, and I didn't want to go home. And she was marching me back to our house. And she's like, we're going. And I'm like, I don't want to. And I stuck my tongue out at her. She was so angry. She just picked me up and spanked my bum. And I got sent to my room, and the door was
Mm.
closed, and my siblings weren't allowed to get me. Like, she just lost it. Well, I don't know. So many years later, I don't know why it came about, but she apologized, and she started to cry. And she said, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I'm just, oh my God. And I'm like, Mom, it's okay. Like it didn't, it's okay. I was young then. I didn't have kids, but now that I have kids, I understand that feeling of remorse and shame that can come from some of our actions. So it makes sense that there's varying reactions to where you are today, but I'm
Yeah.
so glad that you stuck it out.
Thanks. I think that parenting guilt is a universal experience. I have similar, reactions to some things that I wish I had done differently in parenting. And I want to make clear, like, I don't think that my parents are bad parents or bad people. I think that they lacked a lot of skills growing up or when I was growing up, and they made the best decisions they could for the people they were in the situation that they were in, just like all of us do. And I'm sure that they wish they had said or done things differently. And I think we all will. Isn't that human to look back and be like, wow, I wish that I had said this more. I wish that I had said this differently or done this differently. I think that's almost like the marking of a good parent is recognizing where we can improve because it means that you care.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And to your point, we are all doing the best we can with what we have. And it would be, I think, silly of us to discount the the society that we've been raised in, right? There's
Yeah.
been expectations. My parents' generation, the expectation was that Mahara would just get married, find a good husband, and she felt like it, she could get a good job, right? Quite different to what our expectations are for our children. Like, oh my God, just go to university, right? Who cares
Right.
about the relationship? Just get a great education. So I do think that there's some societal pressures that we navigate. One thing I know that my kids have said recently in the last few years as I took on this type of work
Mhm.
was they were like, oh my God, why don't they teach us this in school? Like, why don't I understand emotional intelligence better?
Mhm.
Like, did I really need to learn how to make lasagna in home ec? I would have much preferred to learn how to navigate my difficult feelings, right? Of course, they can speak like this now because they have a mother that does this for a living. But to their point,
Mhm.
feel that there is an opportunity for more mainstream conversation around the challenges that our kids are facing.
I absolutely do. I love a good lasagna. I just want to throw that in there. So it's good
So
that
do
they know
I. So
that
do
too.
I.
But yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do at my centers is DBT skills groups. So it's a kind of groups where we teach emotion regulation skills, right? And we teach healthy relationship skills because a lot of these things are a skills deficit. And I would love to get in all the schools and be teaching these kinds of skills so that it's not something that's reactive once somebody has a problem, but it's something that they have growing up, and it's really important life skills and tools. I think things are getting better, especially with new social media. People are more open, mental health is being less stigmatized. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I think about when I was growing up and I would have meltdowns and I experienced depression, and my mom, I asked her once, like, why didn't you ever get me a therapist when I was a kid? And she said, Katie, we didn't do that. Like, I just don't think there was an awareness of mental health. I'm 42. So whenever I was growing up in the 80s, 90s, I just don't think it was as prevalent as it is now in terms of how we talk about it. And so I think it's getting better and we still have work to do.
So good. What have you noticed with your students? Do you call them students? Your
I call them
patients?
clients.
Your
I'll
clients?
roll with students. It's fine.
What do you notice has been the most common thread with your clients? Is it an inability to articulate their thoughts, their feelings? Is it, I'm just curious, what do you find is a common denominator?
Yeah, the common thread is absolutely inability to tolerate emotions, and it looks different ways. It's either my emotions are too big and I can't handle them, so I do something to make them go away, like self-harm, substance use, binging, purging, some other behavior, or my emotions are too big, I can't even do the thing and approach like I'm so anxious I can't go to school, or I'm too anxious to play sports or go to a party. And so one way or another, they're either experiencing and making it go away, or they're not experiencing at all and having a very small life because everything makes their anxiety bigger.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. Why do you think it is that we are so determined to not feel our emotions?
Because it feels bad. I like it. I want to be like, I like now that I've learned how to, I really enjoy just sitting with and processing my feelings. But if you don't have the skills to regulate or the mindfulness to even think, this is my depression talking right now, right? Like that's a skill that you need to, it's a muscle you need to build. So when you don't have that, everything just feels so overwhelming and crushing. And it's hard not to believe the thoughts that come with those emotions when you're not even aware that the emotion has escalated. So it just feels bad.
Yeah, and I think what you said there is really key, this idea of believing the thought that comes,
Mhm.
because it's easy to just believe it because we always have. It's always that's always, this emotion feels like this, and that feeling means something. This
Yeah.
feeling means I didn't do well enough. This feeling means I suck. This feeling means once again I'm at the bottom of the pile, or whatever comes up in our mind. I remember a couple of years ago when I was doing this work, I had some real aha moments about some beliefs that I had. And I was so surprised that I literally gobsmacked this idea of the mouth open, jaw dropping. I'm like, oh my God, what the fuck? Like, where did that come from? It seemed so crazy. Like, why would I ever think that? And yet it had come up. And, I now know that when I am relaxed, when I can just trust what comes up, trust my inner knowing, just trust myself, I will share what I need to know. And some of the things I shared, I didn't like too much. And I didn't even understand. But through the work of coach and help, I understand it a lot better now. But do you find that there's an optimal age with your students, with your clients, excuse me, where they are most open to change?
So the adolescent brain is really 12-ish to 26-ish, and that's when in that period we see that the frontal lobe isn't fully formed, and so it makes some things difficult in terms of like stability and not having the ups and downs of adolescence, which is developmentally typical anyway. But in terms of openness, I really do think it varies. I think we have some 16-year-olds that are super insightful and open and want to change. And we have some 22-year-olds who are not ready for that change at all. And there's so many factors that go into that, your biology, your environment, like all of the things we all go through that make us ready or not ready for the change in front of us. So I don't think there's one age. I think it's more it's a personal readiness.
Fair enough. What do you think is the correlation between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset with your clients?
I want to say with anyone, not just with my clients, but I think it's around cognitive rigidity, like this all or nothing or black and white thinking, which when we are in a state of heightened emotion, our brain goes to all or nothing. When we are super anxious, our brain goes to we're safe or we're not safe, right? Like that's just what the brain does. And so I think this fixed mindset of if I'm not good enough, then I'm a failure, that is a black and white thinking. It's a cognitive distortion. So I think people that are more flexible in their thinking are able to have more compassion for themselves, are able to give themselves credit even if they're not at the end of the race. So that's what I think it comes down to.
Yeah, it makes sense. It totally makes sense. All right. So now that you're in this phase of your life, you've got this beautiful business, and we are going to talk about that in a minute. You're seeing a lot of success. When you look back on your experiences, what
Mhm.
would you categorize as being some badass things that you've done or felt?
Oh, that's a big question. Okay, let me think through the timeline. I think as a teenager, if I were to think back on teenage Katie, she was super badass and courageous in her self-expression, in the way that she dressed and the way that she carried herself, even though some things in life were, telling her that she was wrong or not good enough. I think that another courageous step that I took, I went away to college my first year and I decided that I didn't want to be away from home. And I made a decision that it was okay to make a change and to do something differently. I think walking away from a world of addiction and the relationships that came with that was really hard, but necessary and something that I did. And I mean, honestly, I could just like list my timeline of my life. I think there are a lot of choices that were really hard and necessary, but not everybody makes the choice that's necessary. And so I want to give myself the credit that I did, and that's what got me here.
So good. And the reason I ask is I want our listeners to recognize that being a badass, look back on your life, because there is, even if you've had challenging times,
Hmm.
look for the times that you showed yourself some love, that you made a decision that was for you, not that was going to help you go forward rather than stay in a tough spot. So
Yep.
many opportunities to be badass. And I just invite listeners to recognize how far and how much they have experienced badassery to date.
Love it.
It's important, right? I mean, whether you call it being badass or celebrating the small steps or recognizing your worth, whatever term appeals to you, I just want people to know that you're here for a reason. And you may have experienced some really tough times, but you're here for a reason and you're doing it. You're doing the best that you can. So talk about everything that you provide today. Tell us a little bit more about this business that you have.
Yeah, so I have a counseling center or a couple counseling centers in the greater Philadelphia area where we serve teens and parents. And beyond that, expanding our scope beyond the state of Pennsylvania, I did write a book. It's called You're on Fire, It's Fine. It's effective strategies for parenting teens with self-destructive behaviors. And so that is the framework that we use at my counseling center. There's a membership portal with videos and resources and other things to support parents who can't access what we do in Pennsylvania because as a licensed therapist we have to work within our state but we have these other resources to help parents globally because Pennsylvania is not the only place where teens are suffering and my mission is to help as many teens and parents as possible to learn that you're good enough exactly as you are and you can learn skills to do even better so that you have a life that you love and you're not just white knuckle gripping to survive through.
So good. Do you find when you work with teens and parents, do you work with them together or are the parents separate? In other words, yeah, I just wasn't sure.
Separate. I strongly believe that both parties need good skills before we can bring them together. So if you take two people and put them in the room and tell them to have a conversation about their feelings, but neither one knows how to describe their feelings or regulate those feelings and talk about it, it's just going to be a shit show. So we want to make sure that they have the right skills. Then we can bring them together if that's part of the treatment plan, but it's not the first step.
Okay, fair enough. What do you find is the biggest feedback that you get from the parents when they go through this program?
A lot of the parents in our program talk one about the support and the normalizing of the process, that they felt guilty, they felt alone, they couldn't go out to coffee and talk to their regular friends about this because their kid is hurting themselves or hasn't been to school in 2 weeks or one of these other really big things that is not a light coffee date conversation. And then learning the skills to respond to how their teen is acting and reacting is another big thing that we hear about. We've had teens come into our program where parents felt really hopeless and they felt like, well, if this doesn't work, my teen's going to a residential. We're sending them away to a 6-month residential program because nothing has worked to date. And then we get emails and feedback of like, teenager has gone on to college or they have this really healthy relationship or now they're working. And those are some of my favorite stories is getting those after they graduate from our program emails about what they're doing in the world and how they're thriving.
So good. What about from the kids' point of view?
I think it's a couple things for them. One is having a space for them where they don't have to be or do anything. They just are good enough as they are. And I think that's really important. But also learning their own skills. I get similar like texts and emails from past clients about their own experiences with relationships in college and work. But their feedback is generally around feeling better. They come in, we talk about, what are your goals? Some of them don't have goals because they're in a dark hole before the starting line. They can't even imagine what a goal is at that point. And so leaving actually having goals for the future and feeling better is a big part of what works for them.
Wow, this is such important work that you're doing. And as a parent who has had some struggles, I really
Mhm.
appreciate that you're doing this because it's so needed. So thank you. Really,
Thank
really
you.
thank you. What are some of the tips that you can share with the audience on, if a parent is struggling to connect with their teen at home? What are some tips that you can give them?
Yeah, so I talk about this in my book. It's called The Hierarchy of Connection. If you're struggling to connect with your teen at home, don't go from 0 to 60. Don't force them to have an interactive, deep conversation with you at the dinner table because that's not going to work and they're going to push back and that dance is not going to work. So you want to start by first being able to be in the same space as them. The example that I give is like, okay, I'm cooking dinner and you're watching YouTube videos and we're kind of on opposite sides of the room, but we're not arguing and there's no tension. And once you can achieve that together, moving on to side by side activities, maybe you're watching a TV show together, maybe you're driving them somewhere and listening to music. You're not necessarily interacting, but you're together and doing the same thing. And once you can achieve that without tension and conflict, then you can start to move into conversations together. Maybe even doing that with another activity like a board game or a sport, something where the pressure to really interact isn't there at a deeper level until you've achieved some level of success in doing it. I'm really a fan of small steps rather than these big moves that tend to fall flat.
Yeah, I was just going to say small steps are the best, I think, in no matter what you're looking at. But I think
Yeah.
it's important to call out that sometimes, and I'm speaking for myself from a parent's point of view, sometimes, well, just as a person, I want the outcome so badly. I get so excited. I just
Mhm.
jump all in and I want, like you said, go from 0 to 60 in one sitting.
Mhm.
So a really powerful call out to just slow down, scale it back, take a breath, and start small and get, build on the skills that you have. So good stuff. What would you say would be a tip for the kids?
Be open to the idea that your parents are fallible and they are human and that they are not trying to hurt you. They just lack their own skills and they're working alongside of you to get better.
So good and so powerful.
Yeah.
What, if anything, is on the horizon for you in the next 6 months or a year?
In the next 6 months to a year, we're planning to continue growing our programs here in the Philadelphia area. We have a school avoidance program that's really, that's a big issue, and we're working on and have some great successes in that new program. I plan to do a lot more speaking, so you'll see me on some stages in 2025 and just continuing to talk about my book and my program and help as many people as possible. I want to enjoy this book before I get to my next one, but that one will come at some point.
Do you have a copy of the book that you can show us?
Don't.
Okay,
I
no
don't.
worries.
Not prepared.
No, you know what, guys, check the show notes because as always, I'll put as much information as possible in the show notes so you can reach out not only to give us feedback on this conversation, but that you can reach out to Katie May directly and with your questions or your comments or your feedback. Katie, this has been a really cool conversation, very much needed. As a parent, I know I wish I had some of these skills, 20 years ago when I started my,
Sure.
well, 30 years ago when I started having my kids. But what's one thing that you want to leave with us? What bit of advice, words of wisdom, words of badassery?
So I want to say, if we're talking to parents, teens, anyone, humans, that we go first in many ways. We go first if we want to heal. We have to be willing to take responsibility for ourselves. And we go first if we want to get our needs met. So being able to consider, one, I need to take care of myself, and two, I need to regulate myself before I expect my environment to change.
Okay. Big, big tip. Part of being a badass is recognizing that you matter and you need to take care of yourself first, whatever that looks like. So thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you again, and I'm going to do some little bit of deep diving in your book. So, folks, thanks for joining us today on the Art of Badassery. Join me next week when I have another badass story and badass guest to share with you. My name is Mahara. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to another badass episode. Your support means the world to me. So if you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like, share, and rate the episode on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback keeps the badassery flowing. And hey, if you're ready to unleash your inner badass and conquer whatever life throws your way, why not book a complimentary badass breakthrough session? Just click the link in the show notes to schedule your session, and let's kick some serious butt together. Until next time, stay fearless, stay fabulous, and of course, stay badass. This is Mahara signing off.